If you've ever been the family punchline while secretly keeping everyone afloat, hit that like button and subscribe right now. You're not going to want to miss what happened next. My sister Vanessa had always been good at presentations. Even as kids, she could sell anything: Girl Scout cookies, school fundraisers, elaborate lies about why her homework wasn't done. At 34, she turned that skill into what she called a career: Director of Strategic Growth at Hartwell Industries, our family's supposed legacy company. I say supposed because the truth was more complicated than the story she told at cocktail parties. I was standing in the hallway outside the executive conference room at Hartwell's Boston headquarters, watching through the glass walls as Vanessa arranged leather portfolios at each seat. The quarterly shareholder meeting was starting in 20 minutes. Inside, I could see Mom adjusting the floral centerpiece, because apparently a business meeting needed decorative touches, while Dad stood at the head of the table reviewing notes. The company my grandfather had founded in 1987 as a mid-sized industrial parts manufacturer had evolved over 3 decades. Or more accurately, it had struggled, pivoted badly, recovered partially, then struggled again. The Hartwell name still carried weight in New England manufacturing circles, but the reality behind that name was significantly less impressive than the mahogany-paneled conference room suggested. Vanessa spotted me through the glass and walked to the door, opening it just wide enough to speak through the gap. Her smile was the same one she'd used to exclude me from birthday parties when we were 12 and 9. "Jordan," she said pleasantly. "The meeting's starting soon. This is for family shareholders only." I'd been expecting something like this, but the casual dismissal still stung. "I'm aware of the schedule. I have the agenda." "Right, but..." She glanced back at Mom, who was watching us with sharp eyes. "This is a serious business meeting. We're discussing major strategic decisions about Hartwell's future. It's not really appropriate for me," I supplied. "For people who aren't actively involved in the company's operations," she corrected smoothly. "You know how Dad is about keeping things focused. No distractions." Mom approached, her heels clicking on the marble floor. She didn't bother with Vanessa's diplomatic phrasing. "Vanessa's trying to be nice, Jordan. But let's be honest, you're not a shareholder. You tried to start your own business and it didn't work out. That's fine. Not everyone's cut out for entrepreneurship. But this meeting is for family members who actually contribute to Hartwell's success." The failed entrepreneur label had been attached to me 3 years ago when I'd mentioned at Thanksgiving that I was closing down TechBridge Consulting, the small advisory firm I'd run for 2 years. What I hadn't explained, because they hadn't asked, was that I'd closed it because I'd moved into direct investment and fund management. But their assumptions had calcified into family mythology. Jordan tried business, failed, now does something with computers that nobody really understood. "I understand," I said quietly. "I'll let you get to your meeting." Vanessa's expression flickered with something that might have been guilt, but she recovered quickly. "Maybe we can grab coffee after? Catch up properly." "Maybe," I lied. She closed the door with a soft click. Through the glass, I watched her return to her seat. Dad was checking his watch. Mom was pouring water from a crystal pitcher. The theater of serious business, performed by people who'd mastered appearances while the foundations crumbled beneath them. I walked to the elevator, descended to the parking garage, and sat in my car for a moment, phone in hand. The irony was so perfect it almost made me laugh. Almost. I pulled up my email and found the message I'd been copied on 2 hours ago. Quarterly report, Hart Capital Partners portfolio performance. I scrolled to the relevant section, the one they didn't know existed. Hartwell Industries investment summary. Initial investment, March 2020, $45 million via convertible debt structure. Follow-on investments. June 2020. $22 million, equipment financing. November 2020, $18 million, supply chain restructuring. April 2021, $30 million, R&D expansion. September 2021, $15 million, bridge financing. March 2022, $25 million, facility upgrade. August 2022, $12 million, emergency operating capital. January 2023, $13 million, market expansion. Total investment, $180 million. Current equity position, 47%, structured through Hart Capital Partners LLC. Notes: family unaware of funding source. All investments processed through intermediary law firm. Monthly reports confirm continued operations viability dependent on Hart Capital continued support. I'd bought nearly half of my family's company over 3 years and they had no idea. The investment bank, the lawyers, the accountants. Everyone knew the funding was coming from Hart Capital Partners. What they didn't know was that Hart Capital Partners was me. Just me. Jordan Hartwell, the failed entrepreneur who wasn't allowed in shareholder meetings. My phone rang. Elena Vasquez, my attorney and the only person besides my accountant who knew the full scope of what I'd built. "I saw the meeting notice," she said without preamble. "Are you there?" "Just got excluded from the shareholder meeting. Vanessa said it's for family only." Elena's laugh was sharp. "The irony is incredible. What are you going to do?" I'd been asking myself that question for 3 years. Every time I'd wired another 7-figure investment to keep Hartwell Industries afloat. Every time I'd sat through a family dinner listening to Dad complain about ungrateful investors demanding too much oversight, while I literally paid for the meal with dividends from my ownership stake in his company. "I'm going to watch," I said finally. "Let them have their meeting. I want to see what they decide when they think I'm not involved. And then I'll decide if they deserve mercy." I hung up and pulled out my laptop, connecting to Hartwell's internal network through the access credentials I'd maintained from my brief internship there a decade ago. IT had never revoked them, another example of the company's sloppy operational practices. The conference room had integrated video recording for remote shareholder participation. I tapped into the feed, muted my end and watched. Dad called the meeting to order at precisely 10 a.m. 12 people sat around the table. Parents, Vanessa, her husband Marcus, Uncle Richard and his wife Diane, 2 cousins I barely knew, and 4 outside board members who collected fees for quarterly meetings and rubber-stamped whatever Dad proposed. "Thank you all for being here," Dad began, his voice carrying the gravitas he'd perfected over 4 decades. "Today we're discussing Hartwell Industries' future direction. As you know, we've faced challenges over the past few years, but thanks to our family's resilience and strong leadership, we've successfully navigated difficult market conditions." I nearly choked. Successfully navigated was an interesting way to describe being hours from bankruptcy 3 separate times, saved only by my anonymous wire transfers. Vanessa stood, clicking to the first slide of her presentation. "Our strategic growth initiative has positioned Hartwell for unprecedented expansion. We've secured several major contracts, upgraded our facilities and expanded our R&D capabilities." Every item she listed had been funded by my money. The facility upgrade, my $25 million. The R&D expansion, my $30 million. The contracts she mentioned had been won using equipment I'd financed. "The question now," Vanessa continued, "is how we capitalize on this momentum. We have an opportunity to acquire Bennett Manufacturing, a competitor that would give us significant market share in the aerospace components sector." Mom leaned forward, her expression eager. "How much are we talking about?" "Bennett's asking price is $85 million, Vanessa said. "But with our current positioning, I believe we can negotiate down to $72 to $75 million. Uncle Richard whistled low. "That's substantial. Where would the funding come from?" Dad stepped in smoothly. "We've been in discussions with our existing investment partners. They've indicated willingness to provide additional capital, given our strong performance." I sat up straighter in my car. That was news to me. And I was the existing investment partner he was referencing. "How much would we need to put in as a family?" one of the board members asked. "Minimal," Dad assured him. "Perhaps $5 million collectively to maintain our ownership percentage. The rest would be covered by our partners. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from tonight." I was already composing an email to my investment team. "Verify immediately. Has anyone from Hartwell Industries contacted Hart Capital Partners about additional funding for an acquisition?" The response came back in 3 minutes. "No contact received. No proposal submitted. No discussions initiated." So Dad was planning to commit my money, $70 million of it, without actually asking me. Just assuming the anonymous funding source that had saved his company repeatedly would continue to write checks on demand. The meeting continued. They discussed the acquisition timeline, projected synergies, market positioning. Vanessa presented pro forma financials that looked impressive if you ignored the fact that Hartwell's current operations were only viable because of my continued support. There's one more thing, Mom said, her tone shifting to something more pointed. We need to discuss equity distribution. Vanessa nodded, advancing to a new slide. As we grow, we need to ensure ownership reflects actual contribution. Some family members have been more involved than others in building Hartwell's success. I knew where this was going before she said it. I'm proposing we restructure family holdings, Vanessa continued. Those of us actively managing the company should have larger ownership stakes. Those who aren't involved, she paused delicately, should consider divesting their shares back to active family members at a fair price. Who exactly are you talking about? One of my cousins asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. Jordan holds a small stake from Grandpa's estate, Vanessa said, as if I weren't her sister but some distant relation. 5%. Given that he's not involved in operations and the shares are relatively modest, I think we should offer to buy him out. It would simplify our ownership structure. My small stake from Grandpa's estate was actually 10%, not 5%. Another detail they'd gotten wrong through sheer negligence. But that wasn't what made my blood run cold. It was the casual dismissal, the assumption that I'd just hand over Grandpa's legacy because Vanessa wanted a cleaner cap table for her PowerPoint slides. I think that's reasonable, Mom agreed quickly. Jordan's doing fine with his little consulting work or whatever he does now. He doesn't need the headache of being a shareholder in a serious business. Dad nodded. I'll have the lawyers draft an offer. Something fair. Maybe 1.2x book value. Book value. 4 shares in a company whose actual value existed only because I'd invested $180 million to keep it functioning. Shares that, at fair market value given my capital infusion, were worth far more than the fire sale price Dad was proposing. There's one other consideration, Uncle Richard said carefully. Our mystery investor. Hart Capital Partners. They've been very generous with funding, but we don't actually know who they are or what they want. I've tried to get more information, Dad admitted. But they operate through layers of legal intermediaries. Anonymous LLC structures. The lawyers say it's not unusual for private equity firms to maintain confidentiality. It makes me nervous, Diane said. What if they decide to exercise control? They own, what, 40% of the company now? 47%. Vanessa corrected, consulting her notes. But they've been completely hands-off. No board seat requests, no operational interference, minimal reporting requirements. Honestly, they're the ideal investor. Money with no strings. Marcus, Vanessa's husband, spoke up. He worked in private equity, which made his next statement particularly rich. That's actually unusual. Most investors at that level want significant control. The fact that they don't suggests either they're incredibly patient or they're planning something we haven't seen yet. Should we be concerned? Mom asked. I think we should be proactive, Marcus said. Before we move forward with the Bennett acquisition, we should try to get better terms from Hart Capital. Maybe even negotiate a buyback of some of their equity. Lock in majority family control before they wake up and realize what they own. I was taking notes now, documenting every word. My lawyer was going to love this. The meeting wrapped up with Dad assigning action items. Vanessa would lead the Bennett acquisition due diligence, Marcus would develop strategy for negotiating with Hart Capital, and the lawyers would draft the buyout offer for my shares. As people filed out of the conference room, I heard Vanessa say to Mom, Jordan's going to be upset about the buyout offer. You know how he gets about Grandpa's legacy. He'll get over it, Mom replied dismissively. It's not like he built anything himself. Some people are doers, some people are support staff. Jordan should accept his role. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark parking garage, my hands shaking. Not with hurt. I'd moved past being hurt by their dismissal years ago. No, this was rage. Cold, calculated rage at the sheer audacity of people planning to strip away shares given to me by the one family member who'd believed in me, all while spending my money and planning to commit millions more without my knowledge. They wanted to negotiate with Hart Capital Partners? Perfect. I'd give them a negotiation they'd never forget. I drove to my office in Cambridge, a modest suite in a building I owned through one of my property LLCs. My team was small but exceptional. 3 analysts, 2 lawyers and my CFO David Chin, who'd been with me since I'd started building my investment portfolio 5 years ago. Conference room now, I said, walking past their desks. We need to discuss Hartwell Industries. 10 minutes later I'd briefed them on the morning's meeting. David's expression grew darker with each detail. They want to commit your $70 million without asking and buy out your legacy shares for pennies? He said flatly. That's beyond arrogant. That's actionable. Elena, patched in via video call, nodded agreement. The good news is you have complete control here. You own 47% of the company through Hart Capital, plus your 10% legacy shares. That's 57% total. You're the majority owner. They don't know that yet, I said. The legacy shares are in my name, but they've been so dismissive they haven't bothered to check current registration. And they still think Hart Capital is some mystery entity. So what's your play? David asked. I'd been formulating it since I'd left the parking garage. They want a meeting with Hart Capital Partners to discuss the acquisition funding and potential equity buyback. Let's give them exactly what they asked for. Hit that subscribe button if you've ever had to prove yourself to people who should have believed in you from the start, because what happened next was perfect. The meeting invitation went out 3 days later, through the same law firm that had been handling all Hart Capital communications with Hartwell Industries. The email was professional, formal, and deliberately vague. Hart Capital Partners acknowledges receipt of Hartwell Industries' request for expanded investment discussion. Principal investors will attend meeting at Hartwell headquarters November 15, 2 p.m. Please ensure all shareholders of record present for comprehensive discussion. Dad called me that afternoon, his voice strained with artificial warmth. Jordan, we're having an important investor meeting next Tuesday. Family shareholders should be there. I know we haven't always included you in these things, but this one's critical. What's it about? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Our primary investor wants to meet face to face. We need to present a united family front. Can you be there? I'll make it work, I said. Good. And Jordan, he paused. Wear a suit, okay? First impressions matter. I hung up before I said something I'd regret. The next week moved slowly. I prepped my team on exactly how the reveal would unfold. Elena drafted documentation. David prepared financial summaries. I rehearsed staying calm, professional, unmoved by whatever reactions came. On Tuesday morning I dressed in my best Tom Ford suit, charcoal gray subtle pinstripe, the one I wore for major negotiations. I arrived at Hartwell Industries at 1:45 p.m. and went straight to the conference room. The setup was almost comical in its transparency. Dad at the head of the table, Vanessa to his right with presentation materials ready. Mom had positioned herself near the door, presumably to greet the mystery investors when they arrived. Uncle Richard, Diane, Marcus, and the board members filled out the rest of the seats. They'd left 2 empty chairs at the opposite end of the table from Dad, positions of supplication, where the investors would sit looking up the table at the Hartwell family's united front. I took one of those empty chairs. Jordan, not there, Mom said quickly. Those are for the investors. I'm aware, I replied, pulling out my laptop and a leather portfolio I'd had custom made for this occasion. Hart Capital Partners embossed in gold on the front. Vanessa frowned. What are you doing? The meeting starts in. The conference room door opened. Elena walked in, followed by David and 2 of my analysts. All in business formal, all carrying matching portfolios. Good afternoon, Elena said professionally. Thank you for accommodating this meeting. I'm Elena Vasquez, General Counsel for Hart Capital Partners. This is David Chin, Chief Financial Officer, and our investment analysis team. The confusion in the room was palpable. Dad stood halfway up, looking between Elena and me. I don't understand. Where's the principal investor? I supplied, standing and extending my hand across the table to Dad. Right here. Jordan Hartwell, founder and managing partner of Hart Capital Partners, LLC. The silence that followed could have been cut with a knife. Vanessa recovered first. That's not funny, Jordan. This is a serious business meeting. I'm entirely serious, I said calmly. Elena slid a document across the table to Dad. That's the complete investment history between Hart Capital Partners and Hartwell Industries. Initial investment of $45 million in March 2020, followed by 7 additional capital infusions totaling $135 million. Combined total, $180 million. Dad's hands shook as he picked up the document. His face went gray as he scanned the figures. You. Mom's voice cracked. That's impossible. You don't have that kind of money. You're a failed entrepreneur? I finished. That's what you called me. What you've been calling me for 3 years. In reality, I closed TechBridge Consulting because I'd built a $300 million investment portfolio and managing a small advisory firm was no longer a valuable use of my time. David placed another document stack in front of Vanessa. These are certified financial statements for Hart Capital Partners. Current assets under management, $340 million across 23 portfolio companies. Hartwell Industries represents approximately 53% of deployed capital. We are, by significant margin, your largest investor. Marcus's face had gone white. As a private equity professional, he understood the implications faster than the others. You own 47% of the company, combined with your legacy shares. 10%, not the 5 my sister quoted in last week's meeting, I interjected. I'm aware you all watched that meeting. I watched it too, remotely. The same way I've monitored every board meeting, every financial decision, every strategic discussion for 3 years. You've been spying on us? Vanessa's voice rose. I've been monitoring my investment, I corrected coldly. The same way any rational investor would. And what I've observed is troubling. A family-run business treating $180 million of outside capital as free money while making increasingly risky decisions with no oversight. Elena took over. Last week you discussed committing Mr. Hartwell's capital, an additional $70 million, toward an acquisition that was never proposed to Hart Capital Partners, never analyzed by our team, and never approved by the majority equity holder. We were going to present it to you, Dad started. When? I interrupted. After you'd signed a letter of intent? After you'd committed my money without my consent? Or were you planning to just assume the anonymous investor would write another check? Uncle Richard found his voice. Jordan, if you'd just told us who you were from the beginning. You would have what? I leaned forward, my voice sharp as glass. Treated me with respect? Included me in decisions? Or would you have done exactly what you discussed last week? Tried to negotiate a buyback of my equity at below market rates while mocking my little consulting work, behind my back. Mom's face had gone from pale to blotchy red. We're your family. You should have trusted us. I gave you $180 million in trust, I said quietly. I saved this company 3 times from bankruptcy. I funded every upgrade, every expansion, every survival strategy you claimed credit for. And you responded by excluding me from meetings, planning to strip my legacy shares, and calling me a failed entrepreneur who wasn't worthy of participating in serious business. David pulled out more documentation. These are the forensic analysis reports we commissioned over the past 3 years. Standard due diligence for investments of this size. They reveal some concerning patterns. He distributed copies to everyone at the table. I watched their faces as they read. Saw comprehension dawn. Saw panic set in. $480,000 in unauthorized compensation increases over 3 years, David recited. Primarily benefiting senior family members. $220,000 in personal expenses charged to corporate accounts. Country club memberships, luxury vehicle leases, family vacation properties maintained on the company books. $180,000 in contracts awarded to family-connected vendors without competitive bidding, some performing services of questionable value. Vanessa was shaking her head frantically. Those are legitimate business expenses. They're self-dealing and potential shareholder fraud, Elena said flatly. Mr. Hartwell has been more than patient. But planning to commit an additional $70 million of his capital without authorization crosses a legal line. As majority shareholder, he has both the standing and the cause to take action. What kind of action? Dad asked, his voice barely audible. I let the question hang for a long moment. Watched them all exchange panicked glances. Saw the power dynamic flip completely. That depends, I said finally, on what happens in the next few minutes. I stood and walked to the window, looking out over the parking lot where I'd sat in my car a week ago, listening to them dismiss me. When I turned back, my voice was calm but absolute. Here's the reality. I own 57% of this company. I am the majority shareholder. I control Hartwell Industries, not you. Not anymore. Jordan, please, Mom started. I'm not finished. My voice cut through her plea like a scalpel. For 3 years, I've funded this company while you pretended I didn't exist. I've watched you take credit for successes that only happened because I wrote the checks. I've listened to you mock me, exclude me, plan to buy out my legacy shares for a fraction of their value, all while spending my money like it was yours by right. I returned to my seat, hands flat on the table. You wanted a negotiation with Hart Capital Partners. This is that negotiation. Here are your options. Elena distributed one final document. Proposed corporate restructuring and governance reform, she announced. Option 1, I began. Accept the restructuring. I take formal majority control. We install independent board members with actual oversight authority. Family compensation gets reset to market rates, which are significantly lower than what you've been paying yourselves. Questionable expenses stop immediately. The Bennett acquisition gets proper due diligence, and if it proceeds, it does so on my terms with my funding approval. You're taking over the company? Vanessa said, her voice breaking. I already own the company, I corrected. I'm just done pretending I don't. If you accept these terms, you can continue in your current roles, under proper oversight at appropriate compensation following legitimate business practices. You'll still have your 43% equity stake. You'll still benefit from the company's success. But you'll no longer control decisions you're not qualified to make. And option 2? Uncle Richard asked quietly. I force a sale of the company to a third party. As majority shareholder, I can do that. You'll get fair market value for your shares, which is significantly less than you think, given the company's actual condition without my ongoing support. I'll likely take a loss on my investment, but I can afford it. You'll lose Grandpa's legacy, your jobs, your executive compensation, and any future equity appreciation. Hartwell Industries will cease to be a family business. It'll just be another acquisition on someone's portfolio. The room was silent except for someone's ragged breathing. I think it was Mom. Or option 3, I continued. I withdraw all support immediately. Stop funding operations. Call in the convertible debt, which becomes payable in full within 90 days per the terms you never actually read when you were desperate for my money. Force bankruptcy. You lose everything. I might recover 30 cents on the dollar as a secured creditor. You recover nothing. Dad's voice was hollow. You wouldn't destroy Grandpa's company. Grandpa's company died years ago, I said quietly. What exists now is the company I rebuilt with $180 million in 3 years of thankless work. The company you were planning to raid for another $70 million while buying out my shares and calling me a failure. Don't talk to me about what I would or wouldn't do to protect Grandpa's legacy. You've already done worse. Marcus spoke up, his private equity experience giving him clarity the others lacked. The first option. The restructuring. You'd let us stay. On merit, I confirmed. Vanessa is actually good at strategic positioning when she's not embezzling through creative accounting. Uncle Richard knows manufacturing operations. Dad understands client relationships. If you can perform your jobs competently under proper oversight, you keep them. But the nepotism, the self-dealing, the entitled spending, all of that ends today. We're your family, Mom whispered. You excluded me from that family, I replied. Repeatedly. Deliberately. You made it clear I didn't belong at your table. So I built my own table. One with better food and much better company. Now I'm offering you a seat at mine, but only if you follow my rules. Because it's my table. My company. My money that kept you all employed and pretending you were successful. Elena checked her watch. We need decisions today. The restructuring documents require signatures from all family shareholders. You have 2 hours to review and decide. Mr. Hartwell's offer expires at 5 p.m. I stood, gathering my materials. Conference room B is available for your discussions. I'll be in the executive office that used to be Grandpa's. The one Dad's been using. I'm reclaiming it. David and my team followed me out. Through the glass walls, I could see the Hartwell family frozen at the table, faces slack with shock. Elena touched my arm gently as we walked down the hallway. Are you okay? I will be, I said. Once I know they understand. Understand what? That family is supposed to be a gift, not a weapon. And when you use it as a weapon, don't be surprised when it cuts both ways. 2 hours later at 4:47 p.m., Dad knocked on the executive office door. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in one afternoon. "We'll sign," he said quietly. "The restructuring. Your terms. All of you. All of us." "Vanessa's upset. Your mother is processing. But yes. All of us." I nodded, unsurprised. Option 1 was the only rational choice, and for all their faults, my family had survived this long by eventually seeing reason, usually at the last possible moment. "The independent board members will start next month," I said. "Compensation adjustments are effective immediately. Elena will handle the paperwork. You'll report to me until we find a proper CO, someone external with actual qualifications. You can stay as president if your performance justifies it." "And you?" Dad asked. "What will you do?" "My job. The one I've been doing for 3 years. Protecting my investment. Making sure Grandpa's company becomes what it should have been all along. Successful because of merit, not just family legacy." He nodded slowly, turned to leave, then paused. I'm sorry. We should have." "Yes," I interrupted. "You should have. But you didn't. And that tells me everything I need to know about what you would do versus what you say you would do. Words are easy, Dad. I'm interested in action now." He left without another word. The restructuring took 3 months to fully implement. Independent board members included 2 former Fortune 500 executives and a manufacturing industry consultant I'd known from my investing network. Vanessa kept her role but at 40% lower compensation and with actual performance metrics. Marcus was let go entirely. His contract included a clause about conflicts of interest, and his private equity work created too many potential issues. Uncle Richard thrived under the new structure, actually seeming relieved to have proper oversight instead of family politics driving decisions. Dad struggled initially but adapted when he realized I was serious about both accountability and fairness. Mom never forgave me. She sold her shares back to the company at fair market value, which netted her $4.2 million, significantly less than the family discount valuation she'd expected, and barely spoke to me afterward. I mourned that relationship, but I didn't regret my choices. The Bennett acquisition? After proper due diligence, we passed. The company had undisclosed environmental liabilities that would have cost $30 million to remediate. We found a better target 6 months later. Smaller, cleaner books, better cultural fit. That acquisition worked beautifully. Hartwell Industries became profitable under the new structure. Genuinely profitable, not just surviving on my capital infusions. We expanded operations, improved efficiency, and started attracting outside interest from strategic partners. 2 years after the restructuring, the company valuation had increased 300%. My 57% stake was worth more than my entire original investment. I built an office in Cambridge for Hart Capital Partners, hired 10 more employees, and expanded into new investment sectors. The Hartwell success story, the turnaround, not the family drama, became a case study I used to attract other portfolio companies. Vanessa and I achieved something like détente. We worked together professionally, maintained boundaries personally. She never apologized, not explicitly, but she stopped treating me like I was invisible. That was enough. Grandpa had left me those shares because he'd seen something in me that the rest of the family had missed. He'd known I'd need them someday, known the family would eventually reveal their true nature. The note he'd left with the stock certificates had been simple. Use these wisely. Build something real. I had. Not despite my family's dismissal, but because of it. Every time they'd excluded me, I'd built something they couldn't control. Every time they'd called me a failure, I'd made decisions that proved them wrong. Every time they'd underestimated me, I'd quietly moved 10 steps ahead. The family dynamic settled into a new normal over the years. Holiday dinners remained awkward but functional. Dad and I developed a working relationship based on mutual respect rather than assumed hierarchy. Vanessa's children called me Aunt Jordan, and knew me as the CEO who'd saved their inheritance, not the scapegoat their mother had once dismissed. But I never forgot what they'd said in that conference room, planning to strip away my legacy while spending my money. Never forgot being blocked from my own shareholder meeting. Never forgot being called a failed entrepreneur by people whose success existed only because I'd funded it. Some things you forgive. Some things you just file away as lessons about who people really are when they think you can't fight back. I framed the first stock certificate Grandpa had given me and hung it in my office, next to a photo of him at the original Hartwell factory floor in 1987. Below it, I added a small plaque with a quote I'd written: "Success isn't about proving people wrong. It's about building something so undeniable that they have to acknowledge what was always true." If you've ever had to walk away from being underestimated and just let your results speak for themselves, tell me your story in the comments. What would you have done? Sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction. It's just becoming exactly who you were meant to be, with or without their permission.